Welcome to another Monday Morning Inspirations. It is so glad to see you here today as we start our week off right. We are having a Healing City discussion hosted by our special guest, Councilman Zeke Cohen and Ann Coy, the Healing City Executive Coordinator. They will be discussing forming multicultural coalitions and sustained movements of Baltimore's communities united in healing from trauma, violence, and racial inequity. They'll share about ways to get involved and work together toward community healing. And I want to share a quote here from the late, great Congressman Elijah Cummings. "Our children are the living message we send to the future we will never see. The question is, how will we send them into that future? Will we rob them of their destiny? Will we rob them of their dreams? No." Quote, Elijah Cummings. So Councilman Zeke has represented the 1st District in Baltimore City since 2018. And back in 2019, he introduced the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, making Baltimore the first city in the country to comprehensively look at and legislate a trauma responsive care. The bill was signed into law in February of 2020. The movement propelled it forward, and we created Help Baltimore Heal from the enduring legacies of trauma, racism, and violence. Zeke believes in the power of organized communities, and for the past 2 years, his office has created a community-driven task force to address trauma and some of the needs in our community. And Ann Coy, she started her career as a Baltimore City school teacher, teaching 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade over the course of her career. Wow, that's quite a range. And after leaving the classroom, she shifted to supporting developing teachers at Johns Hopkins University School of Education. And through both of these paths, she saw the need for better policies to support the individuals and families in Baltimore who had experienced trauma. So she helped write and now implement the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, and she coordinates the Healing City movement. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our 2 guests, Councilman Zeke Cohen and Ann Coy.
Big honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having us this morning.
Yeah, good morning. It's when Wayman told me the time of this, I thought, okay, there will be approximately 5 people on, but it is so good to see so many of you on at 8:30 on a Monday morning. So thank you for joining us. I have some slides we are going to share, and I'm going to start off the presentation, and then you'll get to hear from Zeke here in a little bit. So let me get this going. All right. So Healing City, Baltimore, we like to start a little bit by giving some historical context to Baltimore. The work that we do is critical in supporting the healing of our current population here in Baltimore, but we recognize that this need to address trauma goes back really far in the history of Baltimore. This is a map from 1937, but Baltimore was the first city to codify segregation, to redline where Black people, where Jews, where white people could live. And we know that that has, for generations, created longstanding inequities within Baltimore. The work that we are doing here as Healing City Baltimore and with the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act really started or grew out of a series of shootings that happened in 2019. This shooting that happened at Frederick Douglass High School happened inside of their school building. And at the time, Zeke was chairing the Education and Youth Committee. And this shooting had come on the heels of another shooting that had taken place outside of 2 schools on the east side. And Zeke called a hearing in the Education and Youth Committee to talk about how to keep our schools safe. And at the time of conversation, we anticipated would be really geared towards arming our school resource officers and thinking about, do we need people with guns to protect people from coming into the building who have guns? And instead, the conversation that these 3 students brought That is Damani at the mic, and Brianna is standing next to him in the white and black sweater, and Jayana is next to her. And these three students were seniors at Frederick Douglass High School. And they came and they talked about not the need for there to be people with guns at their building, but for government, for adults, for people writing policy to do better in addressing the trauma that they experienced. And at the time, they didn't know they were naming ACEs, but they talked about all the adverse childhood experiences that they had experienced. Having parents incarcerated, having open drug markets in their neighborhoods, losing friends to violence. And they talked about the loss of their school as a safe space, as one of the only safe spaces in their lives, and what impact that had on their mental health, their emotional health, and really called on the adults to do better in addressing that social and emotional component of their lives. And Zeke is also a former teacher. He taught middle school. And as former teachers, when there are young people who speak with such clarity about their needs, it really behooves anyone to listen, but especially people who are in positions of power and writing policies. And so we connected with them to hear more and learn about what their thoughts were and their ideas. And over the course of the next year, in partnership with them, hosted over 200 listening sessions to talk with people in community about their experiences in Baltimore. And we listened in beauty shops and in barber salons and in community rec centers and libraries, and really anywhere that people would talk with us and share about their ideas and their experiences. And through that listening, it was really amplified for us that there are so many incredible healers in Baltimore, that there are people in pockets, on corners, in neighborhoods, in these rec centers and barbershops who are doing incredible healing work. And we kind of saw our role as twofold. One, Zeke has a responsibility to legislate. That is his job, to write legislation and to enact policy. But we also felt a real responsibility to convene and to bring these people together and to talk with them and think with them about how we could elevate the work that they were doing and hear from them about the healing work that they were doing in community. And so we brought together over 80 organizations for our first Healing City Summit, and brought together and started this movement of Healing City Baltimore. And at our first summit, we hosted, this is a panel from our youth day. This day was entirely youth-led. Part of the work of Healing City Baltimore is really in lifting up, the Black and Brown voices in our community, which includes elevating the work of our HBCUs. And so we hosted this first day at Morgan State University, where young people led the conversation about their experiences. There was spoken word, there were breakout sessions, there were panels, and really had a phenomenal day with 8 high schools attending as a field trip, as an opportunity for young people to know that they weren't alone in the experiences they were having. This is our MC for the day, Shemaya, who's quite literally dropping the mic. And after our youth day, we followed up with a community focus day. And you'll see these beauticians here because the barbers and beauticians that we spoke with in our listening sessions, it became so clear to us what a role that these shops play in community as healing spaces, particularly for Black men who often congregate there, who sit in these seats and have conversations. One of the barbers that we worked with, or that we still work with, Troy Staton, he was shot in his shop in October 2018 by a young man who came in on Halloween wearing a mask. And Troy has really taken that experience and sought to be a source of healing for people and for the shops to be a source of healing. And Troy talks about how the physical touch that men experience when sitting in a barber's chair sometimes is some of the only physical touch that they have. And that he touches not only those who are shot, but that he puts his hands on the head of shooters. And how much responsibility the barbers and beauticians feel as they have the opportunity to sit with people as they're in their shops. As many of you know, when women have their hair braided, they can be sitting for hours. And it's an opportunity to really engage in conversations around what's happening in their lives. And so these are the types of people and types of work that Healing City wants to uplift and think about the role that folks like barbers and beauticians can play as we think about the need for violence prevention and for healing and thinking about people from a strengths-based perspective. So after this community day, which was hosted at Coppin State University, we had this huge group of people that had come to be together as a community, including the Frederick Douglass Marching Band. And the group then marched in solidarity over to Frederick Douglass, where the shooting had taken place almost a year ago to the date, where we wanted to symbolically gather again there to uplift the young people who had originally brought this to the forefront of our attention. Hold on, my slides are not wanting to advance. Let's see if they will. That moment when you know how to play from where you are. There we go. We wanted to uplift and have Brianna and Gianna and Damani talk about their role in coming to City Council and talking about what they saw as a needed solution, and have them also recognize the role that they played in creating Healing City Baltimore and the power of having youth know that their voices can be heard. And so we gathered there with hundreds of people from community as well as policymakers and champions. So after our kind of community convening, then Mayor Jack Young signed the bill, the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act, into law. And you'll see behind Mayor Young is Maya Rockmore Cummings, the late great Elijah Cummings' widow, for whom we have named the bill. Elijah Cummings was a huge champion of this work. He convened the first congressional hearing around the need to address childhood trauma at the same time that he was working on understanding President Trump's role in government and his relationship with Russia. And so he had huge national pressures on his plate, and at the same time was really thinking about how the youth of our nation are supported as they experience trauma in different contexts across the country. We're so grateful for the championship and the championing role that he brought for young people, especially young people here in Baltimore. Healing City Movement continues on. After this summit, we've continued to host a summit annually. We continue to do work in community with all of these healers. And at our most recent summit, we were able to elevate over 800 different organizations and individuals through presentations and panels and community conversations. And we are so honored to be able to work with healers in Baltimore to leverage the work that they're doing, uplift the work that they're doing, eliminate silos, and connect people to these incredible resources that we have. And I'm going to hand it over now to Zeke to talk about what it is that the Elijah Cummings Healing City Act does in Baltimore.
Thank you, Anne. And again, thank you to Wayman and to all of you for joining us this morning. So as Anne mentioned, our legislation came out of a particular crisis in Baltimore where in many ways young people felt unheard by their city and wanted to have more of a role in shaping what Baltimore looked like. And so the first thing we wanted to do with this legislation was make sure that youth voice and community voice was very much embedded in everything we do as we seek to become a trauma-informed city. So we created a task force. It is 38 people, everyone from youth to teachers, parents, returning citizens, physicians, beauticians, just a huge mix of people who are tasked with coming up with strategies to make us a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive city. We train all city agencies in trauma-informed care. I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. And then we ask all of our agencies to work with our task force to review and at times change their policies and procedures to be in alignment with a trauma-informed approach. Next slide, please. So this is a shot of our task force being sworn in. That's Mayor Brandon Scott. And this was the height of COVID, so we kind of had to do it outside and in batches. But good, amazing group of people who are deeply in the work. Next slide. This is a slide of our faculty. One of the things that we heard as we were listening across the city was, you don't have to go to New York or DC or LA to find people who can teach us how to heal. Baltimore has all of the capacity, the talent, the brilliance that we need right in our city. So all you gotta do is find people that have been doing this work and put them to work for Baltimore. And so we brought on folks like Ali and Atman Smith, who are two brothers from West Baltimore. Their father was a Black Panther, and they fell in love with mindfulness, and they now run an extremely successful mindfulness practice where they are literally brought all over the world to teach. They're in the Mohawk Nation in New York, they're in Korea, and we wanted them to teach mindfulness to our city government staff here in Baltimore. Folks like Annette March Greer, who runs Roberta's House, which is one of the nation's premier grief counseling centers. I'm sure you all are aware, but they do outstanding work. And so she talks to city government about grief and how to support people through that process. Folks like the Youth Healing Alliance. Again, we wanted to make sure that youth voices were informing the process as we went. Everyone who you see in front of you is a Baltimorean. And that is important to us because we wanted to build a curriculum that was really rooted, not just in our pain, but in our strengths as a city. And that's what you see. Next slide. This is an article from The Trace. Baltimore bets on a new type of first responder, the librarian. We talk a lot in our city about how to quell violence. The argument that we are making through this legislation is we can lock people up until our faces turn blue. That's not going to solve the problem. We know that there are some folks who absolutely need to be, who are committing multiple acts of violence, who need to be away for a while. But for the vast majority of people, so much of what we see, the violence, the antisocial behavior, the even addiction, stems from trauma. And so we want to equip all of our city government, starting with our library system, to be able to effectively identify and respond when we see it. So we have started training over 450 librarians in trauma-informed care. And the idea, again, is that when you walk into a library, we want you to feel safe. We want you to feel connected. We want you to know that there are resources at your disposal. And that is how we want to operate as a city government. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that the third thing our legislation does is call for each agency to review their policies and procedures with our task force. Well, one of the vestiges of the war on drugs here in Baltimore is that in our library system, we had a zero tolerance policy, which meant that anyone who came in and was suspected of either having used drugs or alcohol before they got into the library would be immediately written up and kicked out. And look, you can understand that, you don't want someone who's drunk or high causing chaos in a library, but We know in the year 2022, and you all know this at Gilchrist, that addiction is a disease, and treating it like a form of criminality is not only not trauma informed, but just wrong. We have attempted in our past to criminalize folks who are struggling with addiction, and it didn't work. In fact, it backfired tremendously. And so we have shifted that policy. We've moved away from zero tolerance, and instead we brought in peer recovery coaches. These are folks who themselves have experienced addiction, who are able to reach people through harm reduction. That's Donna. She's amazing. She's on our task force. She's also a peer recovery coach. And right there, she's handing out Narcan, as well as access to treatment for folks that want to utilize it. Next slide, please. We were able to bring our legislation statewide. With the support of Senator Jill Carter, who's featured there on the microphone, and Delegate Robin Lewis, were able to pass the Healing Maryland's Trauma Act. Took us 2 years to do it, but Jill Carter is one of the most resilient, persistent senators you're going to find, and so she was able to get it done. And so a slightly smaller version of our legislation is now enacted at the state level. Next slide, please. So some of the results so far: we have passed legislation which made Baltimore the first city in America to be trauma-informed by law. We trained the mayor, city agency heads, city council members, and staff, and we've trained over 450 librarians. And we've really tried to go deep, not just like a one-off, one-time, professional development, but like really, really, really going deep into not only understanding the brain science, not only what it looks like, but how as adults, as professionals, we can effectively respond to both regulate and support ourselves first and foremost, but also those that we serve. We are working with a clinician, public health researcher from Bloomberg to evaluate the work. Some of the lessons that we've learned: having legislation has been extremely helpful because it creates an anchor and a rallying point. And when I am gone from city government and Mayor Scott, who's been a great champion, is gone, we'll still have this bill. And so we will still be compelled to do this work. The work takes money. We pay everybody that's involved, except for our task force, they're volunteer, but every trainer, every faculty, the young people, we want to make sure they're compensated. And so it takes compensation, it takes money. And then we are the medicine. Every single one of us has a role to play in making Baltimore a healing city. It's got to come from within. It's not going to come from some other place or some other thing that we import into the city. Next slide, please. So I want to just conclude by where Ann started, was the slide of the redlining map. And to say that in 1910, we were the first city in America to have legislated residential segregation into our city code. And what we are really proud of is that we're now the first city in America to have legislated a remedy for that decision. This work is about people, it's about us. I do want to specifically shout out and thank Wayman and Gilchrist, who have been absolutely phenomenal partners, who've been engaged in our Healing City Summits. I totally believe there is room for more partnership with you all. We are truly excited, not just for our city here in Baltimore, but several other cities that have been reaching out to us and are interested in replicating this model. But again, it's just an honor and a pleasure to get to spend some time with you all this morning.
Zeke, and thank you both so much for sharing this. I'm going to open it up for some questions. I'll let other folks shoot first, and then I will jump in with the question after that. So.
I'd like to say something. I'd like to say three things to both of you. I'd like to say thank you. what I think is so wise is that you're giving youth a voice and leadership. You are bringing people together. I have worked in the nonprofit world, and there's so many people trying to do good, but they need to unite and work together because they're all fighting for the same funds. And together you can do so much more. So I think that's brilliant what you're doing. And the fact that the work, the leadership, the effort, it's horizontal, it is not vertical. So you are including the people on the ground who have to deal with this every single day. So kudos to you for that, and thank you for doing that. And my only question, I don't have the answer, but I'd love to have a powwow here to say, how can we help? How can we be more involved with this? And I see someone else is saying, yes, I'd love to be a part of that think tank.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it, Jane. And I will again repeat that, you all really have been great in supporting the summits that we've done. Wayman has been an excellent thought partner, but I really do think we should deepen the partnership. We have a lot of respect for how Gilchrist operates, particularly around end of life care and just sort of the really community-based approach that you all take. I think there's a lot of similarity in how we see the world, and just the need to embed care through community, and not just like, in a way that feels distant or pathologizing. And so I want to do some thinking and not just like jump off the cuff, but I absolutely, and we'll turn to Ann too, but I absolutely think we should strategically figure out how to deepen the relationship.
Well, with that being said, this brings me to my question. You were talking about some of the best practices and trainings that you have done through this program with the city, and not just one training, but a way to carry that on. I'd want to know, some of the best practices. We were able to do a training with the help of Dr. Leaf and Irving and Dr. Vidal. Last year, we trained about maybe 220 of our staff. But how do we sustain that training? And now that there is a healthcare center, GBMC Health Partners in Jonestown, which is also part of our team. How do we then extend trauma-informed care to that part as well, that branch of our Gilchrist GBMC family?
And you want to take that one? I got some thoughts too, but
okay, yeah, no, I can definitely add some thoughts and then Zeke chime in. I think a lot of the way that we look at this work is that it takes so much time. It isn't going to be like one training, 1 year, and then a checkbox. I think so much of this work is recognizing that people are bringing their experiences wherever they come. And that could be your team at Gilchrist. I think recognizing this isn't about others. It's not just about the people we're serving, but it's also about the people we work with, and really coming at it from a perspective of this is needed at all levels, no matter the person that's interfacing directly with someone or leadership, for everyone to be thinking about the ways that trauma impacts people and to approach people from a strengths-based perspective. And I think that takes a lot of time and practice and working at it. And so for the training that we've done with libraries, we're now in the implementation phase where there are practitioners who once a month are working in libraries to work on, like, you've done this training, you have this information. Now, what does that look like in the context of a library? And so I think really thinking about, like, okay, we've had this training, we've had some time to think about it. Now, like, what does that look like in context of whatever area people are working in? And it's never going to be perfect in implementation, but it's that effort of seeing like, how do I do this better? How do I see people from a strengths-based perspective and recognize the experience they've had and support them holistically? So, Zeke, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think that's right. You know, I would just say that I think, you know, I'm really glad you all had Dr. Leaf. He is, you know, just great. You know, his ability to kind of navigate different community spaces and academia is some of the best. You know, he's awesome, and he's on our task force, and we're really proud of his work. You know, I think just one thing I would add to Anne is, well, actually two things. One is, you know, really thinking about, you know, strengths-based approach. I mean, I think, you know, when I think about Jonestown, I mean, you know, it's a diverse community that, you know, I think there's a lot of folks who are really committed. And I think, you know, there's a lot of resilience there. And so, you know, identifying some leadership within community to help be thought partners and sort of strategically figure out a good shared trajectory, I think is really important. And, you know, again, we try to like not just say, oh, everybody's traumatized, so we just need to provide some service, but think about it as like, how do we support each other? You know, we're all going on this journey, so how do we get there together? And then the other thing I was going to say is, you know, I do think that one thing that Ann and I are both pretty big on is just understanding like some of the history and the context of why things are the way they are. Like, I think, especially as policymakers, as lawmakers, there is this really, I don't say knee jerk, but there's this tendency to like, when violence gets really bad, which it has, to just want to, you know, all right, we need an immediate solution. We need more policing. We need more incarceration. We need longer sentences, to try to do things that like make us feel better and feel less culpable of the problem. But that, you know, when you look at our history, have been tried and already failed. And so I think for any of this work on healing and trauma, just being really clear about the context of our city, the context of the community that you're operating in, you know, and the role that medical providers have at times played in furthering stigma and pathology and, you know, making folks not always feel comfortable. I think, you know, you all are in a unique position with Gilchrist, with some of the work you do around hospice, with just, you know, really, I think, being embedded in community. But, you know, like Ann said, when she was talking about the barbers and the beauticians, I think for a lot of people, particularly in communities of color, there's a real discomfort around Hopkins, around medical care, around like feeling like, you know, I'm crazy and that's why I need help. And so I think working to understand where that comes from and how we got here, and then working to, you know, really bolster leadership within community are just two things that I would suggest.
Thank you so much. And I've been sitting here taking notes diligently. Gina Johnson raised her hand, and I think it's Debbie.
Actually,
that she has a question, and this will be the last one of the morning because we are running over.
It kind of question comment. I mean, certainly as a home care chaplain in Baltimore City, in some of these areas that we've been talking about, I see every day the need to be thoroughly embedded and involved and part of these neighborhoods. And I'm excited. That's why part of hearing all of this again, and I was there at Healing Cities, and wow, Zeke, you are way tall, dude. I was not ready for that. Anyway, people are just in boxes here. But I am excited about ways that we can bring both our trauma-informed care training, deepen that training and bringing that into the city. in a much deeper level how we do our jobs, I feel we will do our jobs so much better. And like you said, certainly even those we work with will benefit from that. That's why I was like practically jumping out of my seat when Jane was like, yeah, I would like to, what do we do next? You know, what's the deeper dive there? And I am all on board and excited at the possibilities about how to work together or how to bring a greater depth to our communities. So it wasn't much of a question other than hoorah, and let's get to it. I was going to say roll up our sleeves, but I don't have much sleeves today, so.
It wasn't much of a comment, but ooh, or what wasn't much of a question, but ooh rah. That
Yeah.
sounds like a great positive note to end on our Monday inspirations. Once again, thank you so much, Zeke and Ann and everybody that was able to log in this morning. So thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful week.